Thank you guys so much. We are continuing our Seeing Through Gebser. Today we're doing the mythical consciousness structure, the natural temporicity, not time. That will come later. And of course, last week we did the magical consciousness structures, timelessness. Before we start, I'm going to do something a little different in this video. I'm going to read two quotes from Friedrich Nietzsche. One of them is called Rationality ex post facto. He says, whatever lives long is gradually so saturated with reason that its irrational origins become improbable. Does not almost every accurate history of the origin of something sound paradoxical and sacrilegious to our feelings? Doesn't the good historian contradict all the time? All you rationalists out there. Let's see, there was another one. And now this is the one that's relevant to this specific video. Original. Not that one is the first to see something new, but that one sees as new what is old, long familiar, seen and overlooked by everybody, is what distinguishes truly original minds. The first discoverer is ordinarily the wholly common creature, devoid of spirit and and addicted to fantasy. Excuse me. So it's not seeing the new, it's seeing the old as new. That's the original. That's what I want you to keep in mind throughout this video. So without further ado, let's get into it. With the advent of polarity came the phenomenon of complementarity. Day and night, brightness and darkness, heaven and earth, pillar and cavern. As we have observed in the myth of Athena, later myth is no longer a form of pure dreaming, but rather a type of dream of awakening in which the mental image of world is anticipated. So remember in a couple of videos ago, the Athena, there's a lot of rationality, the mental consciousness structure went there. So not only are we just dreaming all these symbols and stuff, we are experiencing premonitions through dreams. It's almost like dreams are insightful, and though they are irrational and they're not rational, you should use them to improve your life and to gain insight into the internal and the external and how to balance both. But we see that. Remember, humans are like the acorn. The acorn comes into being with the entelechy, the purpose of becoming a tree. Its goal or purpose is contained within the thing itself. It is embedded within the acorn itself, just like a human. All of our consciousness structures are in us. All these great aspects are in us. Now we must unfold through the consciousness structure evolution. So dreams are not just dreams. Dreams are potential premonitions for new consciousness structures. Don't ignore them. If we are to discover the apparently natural contingency of temporicity, we should therefore not rely too heavily on these myths. Rather, we shall have to go back to the unspoken myths. But as these unspoken myths elude the grasp of our quantifying rationality, we are compelled to seek a different approach to the problem. So this is the difference between us and rationalists. As he says, as these unspoken myths elude the grasp of our quantifying rationality, so the rationalists, anything that eludes the grasp of our quantifying rationality, they say that doesn't exist, that shouldn't exist, or both. And then that's that. We just ignore all of that. We don't do that. When we come upon a phenomena or aspect of the world in the human condition that is not rational, we will deploy different modes of comprehension that will confer a greater understanding of what this is. We will not limit ourselves to an inherently limited mode of thought that can only produce limited results. Why would I do that? It doesn't make sense. When speaking of the temporicity of the mythical structure, we must not lose sight of its residual spacelessness. In the undifferentiated brightness and darkness, man begins to discern forces which slowly disengage themselves from movement and become animated primal images. These primal images are reflections of the inner dark and unfathomable forces in man, which we call the powers of the soul or psyche. So remember, the primal images start to emerge. Image is imagination. Mythical consciousness structure is symbolic participation in natural temporicity. The imagination, that's where myths come from. These primal images are reflections of the inner. Okay. The initial dimly lit consciousness is pervaded by darkness. Only with the gradual increase of conscious intensity is there a proportional illumination of those powers represented as movement. This process takes place on a surface which is spaceless or at least remote from space, like the night with its dark, two-dimensional planiform ground devoid of spatial depth. He says, so remember in the last video, remember in the Lourdes prayer healings, the individual self, when engaged in communal prayer, descends. And if you remember, if you go back, Gebser said, even psychic images are rendered extinguished. So when you see images and the psychic images, you can tell there's a new structure coming because the magic structure did not have psychic images. Everything was unity. There was no psyche or soul. That hadn't been discovered yet. That would come after the discovery of movement. Now remember, the symbol for the magic structure is the dot, the point. There's not a ton of movement with the point. It's very still, it's very static. This is another comparison between the magic structure and the mental structure. Whereas the mythical structure, as Gebser is about to explain, movement is what gave rise to it. And of course, you can see said movement manifest in the 2D flat circle. The 2D flat circle, of course, is always moving, closing in on each other, right? And in many ways, the movement of the 2D flat circle, because it's constantly starting and ending at the same spot and constantly moving, it's moving, but it's also still. And now the rationalists would call this a contradiction. It is not a contradiction. It is a manifestation of polar complementarity. You are missing this if you think that way. He said there must have been a far-reaching connection between the discovery of the first perceptions of regular, that is, periodic movement, and the discovery of the soul. So the discovery of periodic movement and the soul. Periodic, right? These movements were first discerned from the night sky, and the correspondence between its movements and man's own rhythm and dynamics have brought about man's first sensation of time. So as the night sky circled in to the bright dayness of daylight, and as that circled in back again to the darkness of night, and then back again to the lightness of day, I think you can very clearly see, one, the polar complementarity 2D circle, at least how they would perceive it. Two, you could see how this sparks or inspires applying this way of viewing or perceiving things on other aspects and phenomena of the human condition and the world. Plato has obliquely revealed this in his obscure statement that the heavens and the soul simultaneously came to be. So, heaven and hell, 2D flat circle, falling on each other. Night and day, 2D flat circle on each other. Plato says the soul came into be with the heavens or the sky. Remember, the differentiation that brought about sky and land, heaven, hell, darkness, light. Admittedly, we haven't gotten to soul yet, but the soul also has a movement in a 2D flat circle. There is a life pole and a death pole. And everything moves. That is the soul. It is not a static, possessive, spatial thing like the rationalists will tell you. It is immeasurable. It is a circle, 2D life pole, death pole, and everything moves in that. That's your existence moves in that. We'll get there. Don't get too lost. Don't be worried that you don't understand it. That'll be later in the book. The dark, spaceless confines from which movement slowly emerges is evident from the fact that the earliest mode of telling time was based on nocturnal and lunar periodicity. Vestiges of this are still preserved in our modern languages. English, for example, speaks of a fortnight, that is 14 nights instead of 14 days, and Sennight for 8 days, and German Fastnacht, Shrove Tuesday, and Weihnacht, Christmas, and further examples. We must not lose sight of this dark background, although in fact it is very commonly overlooked, perhaps because it is confined to the darkness of spacelessness. Now remember, the discovery of space is the mental structure, so we have natural temporicity, but no real differentiated understanding of space here. So that has to be taken into account. Don't just go back and think, well, they have an understanding of space just like we do. They just have a slightly different understanding of time. No, they didn't have an understanding of space than we did, and they didn't have an understanding of time that we did. So it's a completely different world here. There is an emergent awareness of the autonomous motility of the point, whether in the form of a star, of a person, or a falling leaf. Remember, the point, I honestly, it was 6 minutes ago. I can't even remember if I just said this. The point is static, still, and immobile. That's the symbol for the magic structure. Same thing with the mental structure. Everything's still and static. Mythical movement, right? So if I'm examining, I shouldn't even say examining, but when I'm watching stars move, or a leaf fall to the ground, or the night turn to day, or a person go from A to B, all of a sudden I'm having a more differentiated understanding of movement, and that differentiated understanding of movement will give birth or rise to the new consciousness structure, and that new structure will interpret all phenomena of the world or the human condition through the 2D movement. What's happening here? We went from static to movement, so one-dimensional to two-dimensional. whether in the form of a star, of a person, or a falling leaf, which begins in man following the discovery of the punctiformity of nature and of man himself. Now, punctiformity is a fancy word for to appear like a dot or a point. So the punctiformity of nature and of man himself, magic structure. And we are using the abstract terms here deliberately since it is difficult to apprehend this process concretely. With the autonomous motility of the point, unity is transformed into polar movement, into an event of correspondence which is reflected by the heavens as well as by the soul. And towards the close of the mythical age, these components, movement, eventuation, soul, and also the heavens, all of which are in a certain sense identical, give birth to chronos in the form of time, which makes possible the experience of spatiality. Let's see. Let us for now, however, avoid a premature discussion of the problematics involved in the progression from eventuation via conceptual time to their cleavage into becoming and being, particularly as these are mental thought processes that were anticipated in imagistic form in the Greek lore of the Titans. Our concern here is with the temporicity of the mythical structure and its probable genesis in the spacelessness of the punctiformal consciousness. So how did the mythical temporicity, this sort of interpreting time through this 2D movement, the yin and yang kind of thing, how did that come about? It is the movement of Greek gods who, with the swiftness of thought, were able to conquer unimpeded and as yet unconscious and hence non-existent space. Oh, that's right. It is a form of movement that leads from one phase of the moon to another. From new moon to new moon, 9 moons to 9 moons, birth to death, spring to winter. From the tides of the earth to the tides of the body, which blossom forth, bear fruit and attain completion, just as the year unfolds, bears fruit, and completes its cycle, like the stars which ascend, reach their zenith, and descend. In this, the cosmos itself forms a circle, rotating and drawing the energy for its rotation from the polarity. Beautiful. I almost don't even want to say anything. Beautifully said. Everything starts, has a cycle, predetermined cycle that it begins, goes through, and then ends where it sort of begins, right? Remember, new moon to new moon, 9 moons to 9 moons. Think of the seasons. We start with, I guess we'll say winter, or I guess we'll say spring, or who cares? Winter, then we got spring, then we got fall. Winter, you guys shouldn't be watching me. I'm a moron. Winter, spring, summer, fall, winter again. It all falls back. It is a cyclical, it is a rhythmic cycle. There is no direction or any sort of mental sectoring off the part and just kind of analyzing that. No, you're missing it. It is a holistic process. Begins and ends at the same point. Beautifully said, beautifully put. For mythical man, the movement of his own soul became visible in the reflection of dream and myth, and in this way he became aware of the actual movement of the world. If we are to discovering something outside of ourselves, we must first discover it inside ourselves. So through dreams, through symbolic participation in natural temporicity, as portrayed in myth, as put to image in the myth, he's realizing, oh, I'm not just this static thing. Things are constantly moving, things are constantly progressing. These characters, so to speak, these archetypes start here, end here, or they do this, and then they do this, and then they do that. There is no just kind of standing there like a monk, just sitting there doing nothing. No, we start here. Myth is a great way of this. You don't just start a myth with a guy on the land, and then he goes into the water 30 feet and then comes back, and that's it. Or he just stays on the land, it doesn't even go into the water. No, you move, you progress, you do something. So that's key here. And of course, remember when he says, if we are to discover something quote unquote outside ourselves, we must first discover it inside ourselves. So this is why, again, dream analysis is important. You can only discover something outside in the external world after discovering inside. So you can even apply this in a mental rational sense. So take the laws of traction or adhesion or bearing. We had to sit around and think about this. We had to, in many ways, retreat to this sort of model inside of ourselves and figure it out and then externalize it, right? So the laws or the laws of traction, adhesion, bearing, they're not really tangible things that were just out there and we just had to pull up some dirt and rocks and find it. No, we retreated inward, figured it out with the models, then externalize it. Same thing with here. Same thing with the dream and myth. Through dream, through internal, we recognize movement of the soul, and then we externalize that in myth. The prevailing identification of the soul with number and star in Plato's later works, which he derived from the Pythagorean school, is an indication of the nocturnal birth of the temporal consciousness that was at first in step with natural as well as cosmic time. The cyclic motion of inner forces, which began to be represented in myth, had a complementary and polar reciprocal relationship to the natural and cosmic forces outside man. So everything is cyclical and rhythmic, not start-stop, not everything. It really is. Just think the yin and the yang, okay? New moon to new moon, winter to winter. Everything starts, progresses, and then folds back in on each other. This world of virtual yet still sheltered movement, which was motionless, as it were, since every movement returned upon itself and canceled its effect. Okay, this is the rationalists would consider this contradictory. So you could say the 2D flat circle here. You could say this is a movement, technically, right? We're moving, but you could also say it's still, because the moving constantly just falls back in on each other. So nothing's really has been gained, so to speak. That's mental structure. So it's both movement and static stillness. This is not a contradiction, but expression of mythical polarity. Which, since every movement returned upon itself and canceled its effect, burst apart when oriented thought temporarily halted the course of the sun, when Helios interrupted his course because of his indignation at the birth of Athena, when thought, severing the equilibrium of phenomena, severed the circle. With this, our time and space were born, orientation and direction, which the circle, being without beginning and end, was lacking. Only movement, that is, directed motion, could give rise to what today we call time. So we have our little circle here, and the only thing that could kill this bad boy is the triangle, and that's the mental structure symbol. It's a sectored circle, and this signals direction. So this, there's no real direction here, right? Or if it is a direction, it is a, I would say enslavement, but a submission to the natural cyclic forces of the world. You are, in many ways, almost unifying yourself with these natural cyclic forces. You're not controlling them or creating them. You are unifying yourselves with them. But of course, now that we can sector the circle, now we have problems. Now we can choose direction, right? What kind of triangle? What part of the circle are we sectoring? Stuff like that. When we speak of temporicity, of the temporicity of myth, we are employing a term which is not entirely adequate to the given data. This is the great thing about Gebser. He says these things, and then he kind of sees the arguments, and then he just says, okay, yeah, I know what I'm doing. You're morons. We have accordingly attempted to lessen this error by restricting the definition to natural and cosmic time, which circumscribes both the movement and the agitation or eventfulness of the heavens and the soul. It is the form of movement which is common to both temporicity and the soul, the former being represented in days, months, years, and eons, the latter in proliferation of inner images and their transitoriness. So just like there is a cyclical natural rhythm and movement between outside here that really has nothing to do with us, think of the seasons again, there is a cyclical rhythmic movement internally. There is a correspondence inside. We have the circle that rotates, which corresponds to the circle of natural forces that rotate outside. However we may regard the soul, it will always be viewed in the image of movement, in the image of water or air. Its tides or breathing are life-giving and life-sustaining to the degree as the daily and annual tides and cycles of time. I almost want to spoil the soul and spirit, but that's a key thing. The soul in myth back in the day is always seen usually as a winged bird or some sort of thing moving, the ocean maybe. It's never static. Let's see. Okay. It is this constant movement of temporicity which reveals the true time form of myth. The same time form, with its self-completing occurrence and constancy, also reveals the undifferentiated state of what is now separated into the two parts of the word pair weg. This pair, or the word for quote-unquote movement itself, Bewegung, B-E-W-E-G-U-N-G, is derived from the common Indo-Germanic root weg, W-E-G-H, which means quote-unquote to move, to bear, or carry. From it, along with many others, came the word Gaikos, G-A-I-E-O-C-H-O-S, which means earth mover, an attribute of Poseidon. And it was Poseidon who ruled in the procreative depths and nocturnal darkness of the sea. And the same sea whose tides are determined by the nocturnal moon, itself a reflection of the sun, which forms what we may call the erstwhile heart of our universe and awakens the images and animates thoughts once pondered in the heart by Mary, whose cloak was the starry firmament. So the moon, and we're going to talk about this later in the book, corresponds to the sun. The moon represents the soul with its waxing and waning, life pole, death pole. There is movement here, whereas the sun is a constant source of energy. Spirit, we have movement, constancy. These not contradictory. There are two poles of a complementary pole. And all this Poseidon stuff, this is what he's trying to get you. We were not understanding things through logical or mathematical proofs, though those can be great. We were understanding things through situating and creating images and placing symbolic participation in natural temporicity through myth. So we would create myths and situate characters, so to speak, which always symbolize something. And the way they were situated in the myth is how you could determine the importance or their values or whatever. So it's not about A equals B and B equals C, so A equals C. It's about Poseidon stands in the ocean and he throws his trident towards the moon, which is a correspondence of the sun, and all this stuff. Okay, that's how people understood things, not this other way. This seemingly associative manner of observation is in fact an attempt to report and direct events and phenomena as they occur in the spaceless temporicity of the closed and dynamic image world of myth. By merely describing and thereby intellectualizing it, we would sever its self-complementarity and two-dimensional intermeshing, reducing the pure eventfulness and dynamism to mere temporal sequence or succession. So this is what the rationalists do. They take their little shallow rational accounting of these myths and they absolutely destroy them. They destroy them, okay? Because one, they all have these unbelievably shallow interpretations. Two, dividing everything up, you're severing the polar complementarity, and in doing so, you're missing the whole point. They take the yin and the yang, divide the black from the white, and then privilege either the black or the white, and then they go, well, this is correct. It's like, you guys are just missing it. Let's see. To the extent that they are successful, these whimsical attempts to illustrate some of these intermingled events from the living cycle and to suggest the invisible nascence of temporicity will create an image not unlike that visible to mythical man. We will not have described anything, but rather will have remained faithful to the imagery. One might say that we've, quote, got the picture, so to speak. Again, beautiful, as befits the corresponding demands of this world of kinesis and temporicity. Let us now take leave of the mythical twilight. We have seen that the inceptual element of temporicity remained dormant until reflected by the awakening consciousness, which thereby gave rise to the two-dimensional mythical world of movement and near temporality and went beyond the point-like one-dimensional world of space timelessness. It's all in us. We need a discovery or something to touch that aspects and extract it and bring forth new structures and new intensities, stuff like that. Let's see. It is without question difficult for us to imagine how this mutation took place, but in the light of what we have just described, it will at least be possible to see that it happened and, indeed, had to happen. And although the process unfolded in a world which our present-day thought can scarcely grasp, inasmuch as the third dimension, the indispensable constituent of our mental thought, did not yet exist in it, we must nonetheless make an attempt to make the phenomenon vivid and comprehensible. Let's see. Okay. There are only limited ways and means for accomplishing this. Indeed, it may appear at first glance that there are none at all. If we are content, however, to stay within the framework of visual means, as befits the imagistic nature of mythical phenomena, there is the possibility that we will at least be able to imagine, if not conceptualize, this process. So think visually. Don't think abstract or rationally. We're going to deploy symbolic thought, imagistic understanding to understand myth, because that is what this is, not logical proofs. Indeed, there is an image which can best perhaps illustrate the temporicity of the mythical structure in our attempt to describe it. And even beyond this, there is even the possibility that we can discover a tone or sound from whose echo we can discern the kind of process which led to the mutation from the space-timelessness of magic to the non-spatial temporicity of the mythical. Let us first consider the image and then the sound, observing first what came to be and then its genesis. The image we are speaking is that of Kronos, one of the Titans. Here is Kronos. This is Kronos, one of the Titans. This is the image that we're looking at. Notice what he's sitting on, what's in his hand, and where he's looking, okay? It's very important. Nothing in mythical pictorial representation is irrelevant. Nothing. Let's see. We are cognizant that we are dealing here with a late mythological account of the images, but it would appear that a recollection has here taken on the nature of imagery, which is itself already a manifestation of temporality. Moreover, the figure of Kronos also bears traits of a definitely mental stamp. Let me try it again. Moreover, the figure of Kronos also bears traits of a definitely mental stamp. Consequently, the account is not merely a dreamlike reminiscence whose imagery portrays a past or present event, but is also a kind of prescience or pre-dreaming. That is to say, the mythology of Kronos is not just an expression of mythical temporicity, but in its mythologizing, dreamlike, anticipatory form is also the germ of the notion or concept of time. Time being the mental consciousness structure's conception of exactly that, time, temporicity. So yes, Kronos myth does give you an insight into the mythical temporicity and how that works, the 2D flat circle, but it's also a preemonition of what is to come. These are the things that you can derive or understand when you deploy a different and more efficient mode of comprehension than rationality, when rationality doesn't belong there. All right, let's see. Kronos is the son of Uranus and Gaia, and the child of heaven and earth. As we know from later Orphic times, as shown by the Lamellae tablets with their inscriptions, such knowledge is not merely imagistic, but will come to be a kind of integrated personal and conscious knowledge. Kronos is the youngest of the Titans and father of Hera and Zeus, as well as Demeter, Hades, Poseidon, and Charon, Charon. He is, in other words, father of those gods and demigods who populate the world's nocturnal sphere. To prevent the fulfillment of a prophecy that one of his children would gain ascendance over him, Kronos devoured them. But none other than Metis, the mother of Athena, prepared him a potion causing him to disgorge the devoured children. In the subsequent great struggle of the Titans with the gods, Zeus conquered his father, and Kronos was banished to the realm of the Shades. I want you guys, we're about to explain it, but if you need to pause, I want you guys to try to interpret this. It's going to be difficult, and don't feel bad if you don't. This is new stuff. I didn't understand this on the first time. Don't feel dumb or stupid. It's difficult. But remember, this little mythology is an expression of mythical temporicity and an incipient mental structure. So I want you guys to go through and try to see which one is which corresponds to what. This clearly represents the triumph of wakefulness over the nocturnal darkness of the cavern. Hold on. Okay, Kronos was banished. That's right. So this clearly represents the triumph of wakefulness over the nocturnal darkness of the cavern. Kronos, father of the nocturnal world, was banished. And the banishment to the netherworld is banishment only if understood within the context of Zeus's world, that is, as a condemnation to remain in the nocturnal cavern world as viewed in terms of the magical mythical configuration. So you're being banished to the nocturnal unperspectable world from Zeus's perspective, because Zeus is a new mental consciousness structure and an efficient one. And he is saying, you have been rendered deficient. You're regressive. You're old news. I'm the new one. I'm better than you. From the extant descriptions and illustrations, it is evident that Kronos belongs preeminently to this realm. Figure 22 depicts him holding a sickle, a symbol for the moon, and in figure 23 he is shown wearing a veil, the veil, of course, being a symbol of the covering cloak of the night sky. Let's see. Now here we go. I was going to explain all the differences, but I think Gebser does it best. The mythical account of Kronos clearly shows his nocturnal relationship. It not only portrays, now remember, nocturnal being darkness, of course, now darkness being what pervaded mythical consciousness structure. So lightness, clear light consciousness, that's mental structure. Now we can think clearly and consciously. But mythical magic structure was pervaded by darkness. Space conferred clarity. We don't have that yet, so there's all this darkness. The mythical account of Kronos clearly shows his nocturnal relationship. It not only portrays his essence as temporicity, procreating and destroying, as symbolized by his devouring and later disgorging his children. Remember, he devours the children, and then Metis, I believe, gave him a potion, so he disgorged. So on one hand, we have killing. On the other hand, we have life-giving. These are not contradictions. These are polar complements. And what do we have in the middle of here? Chronos. Chronos is both of these things at once. These are complements. Procreating and destroying is symbolized by his devouring and later disgorging his children, but also specifically locates his activity in the nocturnal realm dominated by the moon, where it increases and decreases as the moon waxes and wanes. This moment of movement, as well as those additional moments, Chronos' emergence from the mythical polarity of heaven and earth, his receipt of the impulse of temporicity by Metis, whose potion made him a life giver and not just a life devourer, since his disgorged children all lived. These moments, remember movement, moments, these moments place Chronos in the configuration of the awakening temporicity, which is reflected in his deeds and sufferings. With it, mythical polarity becomes visible, a polarity which awakens the soul. Or, as we might say, here the soul awakens, its circle closing movement giving polarity, its effect and efficacy. I'm going to repeat that. Let's see. These moments place Chronos into the configuration of the awakening temporicity, which is reflected in his deeds and sufferings. With it, mythical polarity becomes visible. Polarity becomes visible within myth. And once the polarity has become visible, the soul is then understood to be a product of this 2D flat circle. So everything is combined here. So we notice the movement. The movement happens in dreams, and then we recognize its corresponding element externally. We express this movement in mythology, and through understanding these myths and understanding this movement, we understand a greater nature of what the soul is. There we go. The Chronos mythology is a manifestation of what we attempted to clarify at the outset of this section, namely that temporicity is not just of nocturnal origin, but is itself nocturnal in nature. Again, we discern the close relationship between the dynamism of the soul and the movement of temporicity. So there you go. He says the Chronos mythology, then, is preeminently a sequence of images of nocturnal events which make visible to us the temporicity of the night. From this example, we can be said to have inferred the nature of mythical time. Perfect definition. We can said to have inferred the nature of mythical time, a perpetual self-completion of the circle, which is itself a symbol of the soul, and thereby provided a vivid illustration of mythical temporicity. Repeat for emphasis. A perpetual self-completion of the circle, which is itself a symbol of the soul, and thereby provided a vivid illustration of mythical temporicity. Beautifully said. But how are we to obtain a glimpse of the genesis of this temporicity? What means are at our disposal for distinguishing the mutation of magic timelessness to mythical temporicity? This is going to be some good stuff. We should mention here that we are referring specifically to the pure import of the word for genesis, entstehung, E-N-T-S-T-E-H-U-N-G, or de-stasis, D-E-S-T-A-S-I-S, where the process of becoming conscious of temporicity is one of disrupting the state of timelessness by the movement which gave rise to temporicity. This abolition of stasis via movement, remember the magic, the point is static. Movement broke this circle, gave birth to the mythical structure. Where'd I go? The abolition of stasis via movement is then a true quote-unquote destating or destasis. As we come closer to the magic structure, the images fade away. Remember what I said. For its space-timelessness is not only remote from imagery, but from imagination itself. Only one means remains for approaching it more closely: sound. Or if you will, we must attempt to render audible certain specific and highly differentiated primordial sounds. For only hearing and the auditory values perceptible to it are basically able to unlock for us the magic world. The question is, how do we find these values? I could very easily see Gebser having like a little mental crisis, being like, how do I figure this out? It would not be amiss if we were to seek them in the sound of the word roots, and such a venture will disclose audible interconnections and events which we will be unable to account for in any other way. For this reason, so we're going to be analyzing and understanding these subtle nuances and differences between word roots and how they were audibly or phonetically externalized, put to words, put to audible sound. For this reason, a consequential sound shift in one of the primordial roots can be illuminating in the best sense of the word, inasmuch as it discloses events of the magic structure that cannot be imagined or conceptualized. Let's see. Yet our no longer sensitive hearing will be unable to evaluate the original nuances and distinctions of sound, and this lack of auditory sensitivity to re-experience these nuances will prevent many from realizing the mutation as it is represented by the particular sound shift we will speak of in the following discussion. Now we're going to get into some more etymology here, and this is some interesting stuff. Remember, not the one who is the first to see something new, but the one who is someone who sees new, the old as new. Excuse me, I kind of butchered that. Well, we will have occasion to observe that the root group ger, ker, ker. So we have Gher and then Ger, Ker, and Qer, which even Wald has characterized as being closely related because of their guttural initial sound, is of an extremely complex nature and expresses a very specific aspect of life. Before we turn to this, we must, however, interpolate an important consideration by way of clarification and information. We have previously dealt with the root kel meaning, quote, to hold, shelter, conceal. So to hold, shelter, or conceal in the earth. The wealth of words proceeding from this root is characterized by the aspect we can circumscribe as being shelter or security, as well as darkness, and which is conveyed in the image of the self-contained and static cavern. What was the cavern? What consciousness structure does the cavern represent? The cavern being, of course, also symbolic of the magic structure. The root ker, as remember, so we have kel, K-E-L, and then we have, we just have very basic, K-E-L. There's some weird, okay. So we just have kel, K-E-L, that's supposed to be an E, it's got a weird thing on top of it. And then we have ker, similar, they clearly derive from the same root. Let's see, where did it go? The root ker, as well as the roots ger, and ker, Q-E-R, are quite different inasmuch as they all express movement. So kel is static, ker is movement. So we have kel is static, ker is movement. Okay, I think you see where this is going. Let's see, express movement in part. So quite different inasmuch as they all express movement in part, as Wald Hoffman indicates, a vehement agitation of the temperament. And more important, all of the words derived from these roots circumscribe a very specific form of movement, namely rotation. Yes, the 2D circle. Whereas the root kel is a reflection of the self-contained cavern with its space-timelessness, the root ker is a reflection of the dynamic circle. At the moment of formation of the Cronus mythology, the mythical world of dream and the night springs forth from the cavern world of magic, giving rise later to the mutation to the diurnal mental world. In other words, at the moment when the L of the root kel changes to the R of the root ker, so as the second this L gets turned to a ker, so it goes kel to ker, temporicity, which is a form of movement or kinesis, is born. It is as though the static cavern were set in motion, a motion which in order to be represented needed a dimension which the one-dimensional cavern did not possess. So kel could not give you movement. Kel was one-dimensional and it was static. So the very, very subtle change to ker implies movement. This is a new dimension and a new way of bringing objects in the world into relation with each other that we can deduce based on this unbelievably small and seemingly inconsequential change in the word root. This dimension becomes visible in the circular motion of the nocturnal sky in the words Koros and Kyklos, K-Y-K-L-O-S, circle disk, which proceeded from the root ger and its close relative kel, Q-E-L, in which spacelessness was transformed into surface. Choric and cyclic movement, choros, means not just roundel and dance, but also roundel of the stars, that is, regular sidereal movement. Carved polar surface may be out of spacelessness. That was kind of a weird paragraph. Although to us today, the shift from L to K may seem insignificant, an echo of the birth of temporality, for there can be no doubt that L preceded R Even today, peoples closer to the magical realm than we of Western civilization have difficulty articulating the R. The Chinese, for example, pronounce it as an L. So not only do we know that the Kel, or the L in Kel, is a magic structure because it's closed off, static, and forms a cavern-like, it's static, the L came before R. So the R only came about because a new dimension was perceived and we had to come up with new guttural sounds to represent this new dimension. The Chinese, for example, so their language, they struggle with R because the L came first, and that's magic. If your language is built in the magic, it might struggle with mythical. If we closely now this is fascinating. If we closely observe the qualitative distinctions between the three consonants K, L, and R, we can discern the mutation which gave birth to the reality of the mythical structure. The guttural K is formed at the most secluded, deepest, and darkest part of the oral cavity. When joined by an L, the composite sound, assuming the vowel E, formed by the guttural K is completely contained within the mouth. So when I audibly say Kel, the vibrations emanating from the movement in my mouth to do that is contained within the mouth, the oral cavity. That is to say, it takes on the cavern-like appearance of the cave. Everyone is in the cave. We're not outside of the cave. Let's see. Kel is a static sound, as it were, which occurs within the confines of the oral cavity. But if the K is joined by an R, which from the very outset is a dental and not a guttural, the entire sound generated by the initial K vibrates towards the outside. We might say that the K is a shelter, the L an enclosing, and the R an aggressive sound. The consequentialist distinction between the L and the R was noted as far back as Ebner. So think about this. When we have the K, L, everything is staying within the oral cavity, which mirrors the pattern of a cave, right? So everything is the magical conscious structure, that point-like unity, and it's even expressed in the vibrations, emanations coming from the mouth. But once R comes in, as he says, what does he say? The initial K vibrates outside. So what's happening here? We have the one dimension of the inside cavern of the oral cavity, and now that the R comes in, instead of staying inside, it goes outside, which means there's a new dimension, and this new dimension is manifest even in, again, the vibrations and sounds emanating from the words we use to speak. Fascinating. Fascinating. Okay. Where did I always miss? I need to start putting my what am I missing? Hold on. Okay. The consequential distinction between the L and the R was noted as far back as Ebner, who had a keen ear for such details. The R, phonetic opposite of the affricative L, appears in fact to be the phonetic symbol for the experience of a resistance or its overcoming. So, it almost sounds like a new consciousness structure has been born here. In the terminology in German to denote the tonalities in music, to cite but one example, attributes to the dark or minor tonalities L character, Molltonnerton. To the brighter or major tonalities R character, Derntonarten. So you're even seeing this expressed in German. So darker music tones that signal a more cavern aesthetic have L, whereas lighter ones that signal the brightness of day have an R. I would never be able to pick this stuff out. With the genesis of the R, a counterpole is created of the unitary KL. R can therefore be heard as the polar sound of the L. It's incredible. Transposed to our image, Kronos forms the awaking counterpole to the static, secluded darkness. As such, he is none other than the motion of the night. That is to say, he is mythical temporicity, the image of the reciprocating self-complementary circle which creates and destroys, again creating and destroying like the roundel of ascending and descending stars, whose rhythm is still represented in many folk dances, such as the Catalonian sardana, a roundel which, like many others, still manifests today the presence of mythical temporicity. So I want to actually go back and just make sure, because I think this is pretty interesting stuff. Let me just read this. We have Kel and we have Kirks. This is fascinating. So the Kel, as he says, let's see if I can read this. Let's go back here. In other words, at the moment when the L of the root kel changes into R of the root ger cur, temporicity, which is a form of movement or kinesis, is born. It is as though the static cavern were set in motion, a motion which in order to be represented needed a dimension, which the one-dimensional cavern did not possess. Although today the sound shift from L to K may seem insignificant, it is still an echo of the birth of temporality, for there can be no doubt that L preceded R even today. People closer to the magical realm than we of Western civilization, and the difficulty articulating the R. The Chinese, for example, pronounce it as an L. So the L closed and conferred the static cavern-like characterization of the word, and then the simple shift from kel to cur is a new dimension being added. So just like the new dimension is added with the mythical structure. So that'll be all. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys learned something. And next we're going on to mental time, which is what we understand time as. So homework assignment, what do you think the difference is between the mental conception of time and natural temporicity are going to be? Don't look it up either. If you don't get it right, that's okay. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys soon. You guys are the best. Thank you.